Hi, I'm going to go through Knights Explained, the Knights of the Middle Ages reading. Okay, Knights of the Middle Ages. What is a knight? There were three main types of soldier during the Middle Ages: foot soldiers, archers, and knights. The knights were heavily armed soldiers who rode on horseback. Only the wealthiest nobles could afford to be a knight. They needed very expensive armor, weapons, and at least one powerful war horse. Okay, so the main things about the knights is that they are heavily armored soldiers. They're wealthy, and they need to have at least one powerful horse and expensive armor. Okay. The first knights of the Middle Ages fought for Charlemagne, the king of the Franks, in the 700s. In order to fight battles across his large empire, Charlemagne began to use soldiers on horseback. These soldiers became a very important part of his military, or of his army. Okay, so key person here, Charlemagne. And he was the first to begin using soldiers on horseback. Charlemagne began to award his best knights with land called benefices. In return for the land, the knights agreed to fight for the king whenever he called. This practice caught on through much of Europe and became standard practice for many of the kings for the next 700 years. If you were a son born into the family of a knight, you generally became a knight as well. So the best knights were given land. And if you were a son born into the family of a knight, you became a knight as well. Okay. Chivalry. Knights had to live by a certain code of behavior called chivalry. The expectations included a combination of qualities, especially courage, honor, courtesy, justice, and a ready to help the weak. Another way of saying that is all pages, 7 to 14-year-old boys who would become a squire. Wait a minute. Pages. Hold on a second. Pages are 17 to 14-year-old boys who would then become a squire. Then there were squires, who were 14 to 20-year-old males, who would then become knights. And then there were knights that had to follow the elaborate code of conduct. And this is called chivalry. A knight pledged loyalty to their liege lord, promised to be brave in battle and protect the church and those weaker than themselves, and to become courteous to noblewomen. A knight's code of conduct included mercy, humility, honor, sacrifice, faithfulness, courage, and graciousness. The code was to be followed at all times. In brief, kings swore to be the good guys. Knights swore to be the good guys. Sometimes they had to sign a contract swearing they would live this way. So knights had to live by a code of behavior called chivalry. So chivalry is a code of behavior. You started out as a page, then became a squire, and then became a knight. And the code was to be followed at all times. And they had to be courteous, brave. They had to protect the church and protect those weaker than themselves. Mercy, humility, honor, sacrifice, faithfulness, courage, and graciousness. The end of the knights. By the end of the Middle Ages, the knight was no longer an important part of the army. And this was for two main reasons. One reason was that many countries had formed their own standing armies, and they paid soldiers to train and fight. And they no longer needed lords to come and fight as knights. The other reason was a change in warfare. Battle tactics and new weapons, such as longbows and firearms, made the heavy armor knights wore cumbersome and useless. So this made it much easier to arm a soldier and pay for a standing army. So let's look back at the two reasons. One reason was that many countries had formed their own armies, and they paid their own soldiers to train and fight, so they no longer needed them. The other reason was a change in warfare. Battle tactics and new weapons made the heavy armor the knights wore cumbersome and useless. Okay. Interesting facts about knights from the Middle Ages. Knights often fought for the rights to pillage and steal the wealth from towns they conquered. They could become quite rich with the loot that they gained from ransacking a city or a town. By the end of the Middle Ages, many knights paid the king money instead of fighting. Then the king would use that money to pay soldiers to fight. So this payment was called shield money. Think about it. The knights were actually pretty wealthy guys, and they didn't really want to fight, so they would pay soldiers to fight, and they called that shield money. It's kind of like paying them off so they didn't have to do the fight themselves because they were rich. They didn't really want to fight. The word knight comes from an old English word meaning servant. Today, knighthoods are awarded by kings and queens to people for their achievements. It is considered to be an honor. Famous people who have been knighted in recent years include U.S. President Ronald Reagan, Microsoft founder Bill Gates, singer Paul McCartney of the Beatles, and the movie director Alfred Hitchcock. And I believe Elton John was also knighted. Okay, so again, they were rich people who were servants to their nobles or their king. Okay, so the questions that you have to answer are these right here. Make them a little bigger. According to the article, why were most of the male people in the Middle Ages excluded or prevented from being a king? Well, because they couldn't live up to the expectations of chivalry, because they couldn't afford it, because they weren't brave, because they weren't tall. Well, they couldn't afford it, because I think they had to have horses and armor, and they had to have some nobility in them. So why was it very expensive to become a knight? Well, because you had to have your own horse. Yeah, true. Because you had to provide your own armor. Yes. Because you had to provide your own weapons. Yes. So all of the above. Yeah, I go with all the above on that. Because they had to have all those things if you look back at the reading. Which of the following is the best description of who Charlemagne was? Was he king of the Franks? Yes. Was he a king of the Franks from the 700s who used soldiers on horseback as part of his army? Yes. Was he a king of Europe who saw the advantages of feudalism and adopted it? Was he a knight who rose to power by conquering everyone and everything around him? No, I would say it's definitely he was king of the Franks. They said that. And he also did this. And he also did this. I don't think he was a knight. We didn't read anything about that. So the best answer here would probably be this one right here. He was a king of Europe who saw advantages of feudalism and adopted it. Or, yeah, he actually... Was he king of Europe or was he king of the Franks? Maybe it was this one. He was king of the Franks. It's one of those two. You have to go back to the reading and double check that. Which quote from the article best explains feudalism? Charlemagne began to award his best knights with land called benefices in return for the land. The knights agreed to fight for the king whenever. The first knights of the Middle Ages fought for Charlemagne, the king of the Franks, in the 700s in order to fight battles across his large empire, soldiers on horseback, or if you're born into the family of a knight, you generally became a knight as well. So which one best talks about the process of feudalism? Charlemagne began to award his best knights in return for land. The knights, I'm gonna go with this one, because this just talks about the knights that fought for Charlemagne. This kind of talks about if you're born into a family of a knight, you generally became a knight, but this one talks mostly about the land and feudalism. Which of the following is the order in which a child would become a knight? Oh, I remember highlighting this one. It was a page was first, then a squire, and then a knight. I remember going through that one. Okay. According to the article, which of the following would best describe chivalry? A code of behavior which knights had to follow, yeah. A code of behavior which knights had to follow so they could become king, no. A code of behavior in which knights had to follow which included rules for their behaviors and how to treat people, yes. A code of behavior which knights had to follow which included how to dress, eat, drink, socialize, and fight. I don't remember them talking about eating. So it's either this one or this one, and I would say I would go with this one. But code of behavior, knights had included rules for their behavior and how to treat people. I would say that one best describes it a little bit better. True or false? Knights were expected to behave just like everyone else. False. They had to actually help people. They didn't just they weren't just like everyone else. According to the article, why did standing armies eliminate the need for knights? Oh, because knights became too hard to control? No. Because a force to deal with problems outside or inside your region or company was readily available? Not really. Because lords could no longer be counted on to supply needed fighters. Or all the above. Because a force to deal with problems outside or inside your region was readily available. Yeah, I would say that was it. Only because they weren't hard to control. It's not that they couldn't be counted on, so it's not all the above. That's my thinking anyway. According to the article, what weapon reduced the need for knights? I heard them say longbows. And the last one, true or false? The first bullet point of the section, interesting facts about knights in the Middle Ages, contradicts what goes against one of the main ideas. Ugh. Interesting facts. Yeah, I would agree with this because the first line actually contradicts because they're pillaging people and taking things. So I would say true on that one. Because I would not think that knights would go in and take and steal things from people, but apparently they did. So that was that. All right. So good luck trying to get this done.